Decreasing COVID-19 infection numbers must not lead to complacency. The man who identified the new variant says the virus is now more contagious than ever. Professor Tulio de Oliveira warns complacency will lead to a third or even a fourth wave.
As we see the decrease on peak, we go back to be complacent. If we are complacent and we cannot stop completely transmission of this virus, we are likely to see a third or fourth wave, and I would not be surprised with more virus that are better adapted for transmission and evade immune response. Other thing that we are very worried, it is what's happening in our neighboring countries, in the SADC region. And it's very important that we are working through the African Union and the Africa CDC to also support them with both genomic surveillance, but also to increase the access to hospital beds and oxygens, because a lot of our neighboring countries, they have much less resources than us.
Now, while scientists are hard at work to understand the new COVID-19 variant that has emerged in South Africa, Professor Salim Abdool Karim says that this new strain is a cause for concern. But we're now seeing more cases and deaths than we ever saw on any day during the first wave. Karim explains how the 501Y.V2 variant is highly transmissible.
Let me start with what kicked off my deepest concerns. It turned out that on Boxing Day, I was going up to watch the cricket match. And because I got there early and the cricket hadn't started, I said, well, I'll just check my emails. And of course, I did that, and that was a mistake. Because what comes up is this paper by Fratev. In this paper, as I'm reading it, and I look at the 501 and the 417 mutations, and I see what he found they were doing studies using free energy perturbation. He showed how these amino acids, which have changed, which lead to changes in the charge and the shape of the protein, he showed how the binding of the virus to the human cell had changed significantly. In particular, what he noted is that the virus and the spike protein now rotates about 20 degrees so that it's able to approach more deeply into the binding site, so that its affinity and its ability to bind to the human cell is now stronger. And that's what enables it to become a more efficient virus in the way it transmits. And we're seeing that. We see it in the number of the proportion of tests that are positive. On the left-hand side is the daily average number of tests that are being performed, and on the right-hand side is the proportion of tests that are positive. You can see we went to a high of almost 32%, almost 1 out of 3 tests being positive, higher than we ever had in the first wave. And now we're slowly starting to see how it's coming down, with last week being at 27%, and this week it's still an incomplete week. We're now seeing closer to 23%.
So what is the new COVID-19 variant, and how and why did it mutate? Infectious diseases specialist Richard Lascelles explains.
As the virus passes through from person to person and replicates within each of our bodies, you get errors in the genetic code. And this is what's called a mutation. So it's just a change in the letter within the RNA code. Now, most of these changes are innocuous. They don't lead to any change in the amino acid and no change in any of the virus proteins. But some of them, they change the amino acid and therefore change the protein. And they may be able to change the structure of the protein or the function of one of the virus proteins. And Professor Abdool Karim highlighted that when we first noticed this variant, the 501YV2, there were a number of things that were striking about it in the genetic data. So first of all was just the number of genetic mutations that there were was much greater than the other viruses that we were detecting in the country. The second thing was that most of the mutations were causing a change in the protein. And the third thing was that a large number of the mutations were in the spike protein of the virus. And again, Professor Abdool Karim's highlighted how important the spike protein is, because that's the bit of the virus that latches onto the receptors on our cells inside our body, and that also the antibodies kind of latch on to block from binding to the receptor.
Well, over 4,000 South Africans have been reinfected with the COVID-19 virus, but scientists are still investigating how reinfection works.
The analysis that we had is that as of the 6th of January, with this analysis, we had more than 4,000 potential reinfections, which therefore says to us we are getting reinfections. And this actually confirms the data that we already know, that we do have reinfections. What we don't know is who actually gets reinfections, what drives the reinfections. And these are some of the, tonight is some of the trying to understand why we're getting reinfections. Might it be because of the new variant or not? Now, the second question was the reinfections, are these increasing with the new variant? When we analyze the data, and up to today, up to the 6th of January, we really have seen a constant risk of reinfections, which means we have not seen a marked increase except for the numbers that we have been seeing, as eloquently mentioned by Salim. Apart from the increased numbers of infections, we are not necessarily seeing an increase in the risk of reinfection. So far, we are able to say there is no evidence that suggests that the risk of infection is increasing as a result of the new variant. But bear in mind, we're only talking a month, so far. So this is an area that we need to look very closely